ay, 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 da 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 da, hey, da 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 da.
Take something that the Zohar states very clearly and to see it right in the whole, geographical. I mean, this is very nature, very practically based a mashal as a analogy. So I'm just appreciating that,
Yeah,
how he does this.
absolutely.
He
And
reframes the meaning from a description of, as we said before, like a geography to something very spiritual. Those of you watching on YouTube, go to the end of the video for instructions on how to find the Hebrew text of the Sfat Emet in sefaria.org. The text that the Sfat Emet is going to comment on is Deuteronomy chapter 11. Let me find it, chapter 11, verse 10. So the Sfat Emet starts by actually quoting the verses that he's going to refer to, and let me actually review those. Those are going to be verses 10. Ki haaretz asher ata ba shama lerishta, as the land that you're about to inherit. Lo eretz Mitzrayim, he is not like the land of Egypt. Asher yatzatem misham, that you have left. Asher tizra et zaracha, that you will sow your seeds. V'hishkita beraglecha, and you will water by using your legs, which means through labor, through effort. Kigan hayarak, as the vegetable garden or the green garden. And it continues, verse 11. Va'aretz asher atem ovrim shama, and the land to which you are in passage to, lerishta, to inherit it. Eretz harim uvekaot, is the land of mountains and hills. Limtar hashamayim tishtemayim, which drinks water from the rains from heaven. And then verse 12, Eretz asher Adonai Elohecha doresh ota tamid. This is a land that God, your God, is tending to always, or looking after always. Ene Adonai Elohecha ba, God's Adonai, your God's eyes are on it all the time. Mirashit Hashana, from the beginning of the year, ad acharit Hashana, till the end of the year. In verse 13, V'haya im shamoa tishmeu el mitzvotai, and it will come to be if you listen to my, or follow my mitzvot, asher anochi mitzavet etchem hayom, that I command you today, le'ahavat Adonai Elohechem, to love Adonai, your God, ulavdo b'chol levavchem u'b'chol nafshechem, and to pray to him or worship him with all your heart and all your soul. Verse 14, v'natati matar artzachem, and I will give you the rain for your land, be'ito, in its time, yoreh u'malkosh, early and later, v'asafta diganecha v'tiroshecha v'tzarecha, and you shall harvest your wheat and your oil and your grain. And I think I'll stop there. I think those are the verses that he's going to refer to in his commentary. And he continues, V'kashe hazri'ah. And it's there's a question about why the Torah mentions the sowing of seeds in the first verse. Tzarich hayalo tzarich. Why is it necessary? V'hayalo lomar rak asher ishketa beraglecha. It only should have said that the land that you watered with your legs. Remember, that was the back in Egypt. That's the difference between Egypt and the land of Israel. ויש לומר, הכוונה, על פי מה שנאמר, and we need to say that the meaning of this is according to what's said, Eretz Asher Adonai Elohecha Doresh Ota. Later on it says, this is a land that Adonai, your God, tends to. V'amru Chazal, and the sages said, Alo kol ha'aratzot doresh Adonai. So the sages asked, but all the lands in the world God tends to. And the sages said, Alo kol ha'aratzot doresh Adonai, rak b'zchut shedoresh ota kulan nidrashot. But because God is tending to the land of Israel, then through that all lands are tended to. Want to help clarify that, Rebelli?
Sure. This Hasidic master is taking this verse from this week's Torah portion, which this is Moses' death soliloquy, his final parting words to the Jewish people. And as soon as he dies, they're going to be, soon after that, entering finally the land of Israel. So here, the verse is speaking about the greatness and contrasting the land of Israel with all other lands. And all other lands are epitomized by the land of Egypt. That's the contrast, the land of Egypt, the land of Israel. So in pointing out the benefits of the land of Israel, the verse says something that this Hasidic master points out is, at first glance, not understandable at all. Moses says, the land that you're going to now, the land of Israel, it's not like Egypt. In the land of Israel, there will be rain. There will be the blessing of rain to water the crops. In Egypt, there was no rain. The water had to be brought manually from the Nile River. As we know, the only water source in Egypt is from the river. Okay, that makes sense. In Israel, there's going to be rain. In Egypt, there was no rain. Okay, I get it. But it also says Israel is not like Egypt, where you had to plant seeds. Well, wait a minute. You don't have to. We're not going to have to plant. It's going to be magic. Things growing, the crops growing by magic. What do you mean we're not going to be having to plant seeds? Of course, you're going to have to plant seeds in Israel. So the Sfas Emes is asking, what in the world is the simple meaning of this verse? It doesn't make sense. And the conclusion of the verse says, you're going to a land that God takes care of and attends to constantly. Well, God attends to everything, every place, every person, every created thing in the world at all times, or else it wouldn't exist. So these are the two questions that we're dealing with. The ideas that are going to be presented here are going to show, number one, the unique nature of the land of Israel. And number two, we're going to be speaking about the special power of the land of Israel and the Jewish people to infuse the material world with a special kind of spirituality.
Not only the specialty of the land of Israel, but also the mission of the people of Israel. And I think that's one of the nice things about here is that the Sfas Emes is really clarifying that we, the people of Israel, we're people with a mission. It's not just a random passage from Egypt to land of Israel, but we're going there for a purpose, for a mission. And I think he clarifies that here. So, והיינו, שניתן לבני ישראל נחלת השם שהיא הקרובה אליו, יתברך. and thus it's the people of Israel are given the land of God, which is close to Him. So, is he meaning here that the land is close to Him?
Yes, so the specialness of the land of Israel, from which our sages teach us the entire world was created from a particular spot where in Jerusalem, where I think Rabbi Ruvain is right now speaking to us
Not far from Jerusalem.
miraculously, not too far from Jerusalem. But what we're saying here is that there is a specialness, which we'll see what that specialness, how that manifests itself in reality. But we have to start from the point of view that God created a special place in the world from which the special mission that he is giving to the Jewish people to help all of creation through the learning of the Torah and the performance of physical commandments, mitzvot, as we'll see.
Right. So just help me understand here, Billy. והיינו שנתן בני ישראל נחלת השם שהיא הקרובה אליו יתברך וזה למטר השמיים תשתה. So he's interpreting that because it's written that you will drink, or the land will drink from the rains of heaven. Is that referring to the fact that the land is close to God, or Israel is close to God? What exactly is?
Yes, I would say that the reason it says the rain of heavens, just say rain.
Right.
You don't have to rely on a lake or on a river.
Right.
You're going to get rain. It doesn't say rain. It says heavenly rain. It will drink heavenly rain. Very poetic, odd. So he's saying no. It's literally a miraculous sort of a spiritual infusion of irrigation.
Understood. So he says, "V'achar kach mimena nishpat l'shar ha'aratzot," and after that, after Israel draws the rain from heaven, then it flows to the rest of the countries in the world. V'chulan tluin ba, and the other countries are dependent on her. So what he's saying is that what looks to us as sort of like a weather report, or like a or like a lesson in geography, right? So look at the climate in Israel. It's so different from the climate in Egypt, because they get their water from a great river, but we in Israel, Israel gets its water from the heavens. That actually has it's a metaphor for spiritual dynamic, which means that the land of Israel is drawing from heaven, but all other lands draw from her. This is sort of like you could say the funnel for spiritual energy into the rest of the world, is what he's saying. וזה שנאמר שאינה ארץ פרטי אשר תזרע זרעך בפרט. So he says, in Israel, it's not a land of private endeavors, you could say, as in Egypt, where it says, you will sow your seed. You meaning an individual person, right? So he's saying that's another difference. That in Israel, there's a collective, maybe that's the answer to why doesn't it say, sow your seed, singular, about Israel, because there is no singular sowing. This is through the entire people. This is for the whole land. רק היא כוללת כל השפע הבא משמיים, because Israel includes, you could say, embraces all the spiritual flow that comes from the heaven. ובני ישראל במעשיהם הטובים, and the people of Israel, with their good deeds, מושכין הברכה לכל העולם, are drawing blessing to the entirety of the universe. To take something that the Zohar states very clearly and to see it right in the whole geographical. I mean, this is very nature, very practically based a mashal as a analogy. So I'm just appreciating that. how
Yeah,
how he does this.
absolutely.
He
And
reframes the meaning from a description of, as we said before, like a geography to something very spiritual.
right, absolutely. And this the next step, of course, we don't stop there. The next step, and this is really the beauty of the whole thing, is that okay, it's a miracle land. It's unbelievable, but you can't lock yourself in. Surround
Yeah,
yourself with a wall. The whole point of having access to this great spiritual land is to influence and
yeah,
infuse all of everybody and every place in the world with
that's right.
our gifts, not to keep our
Yeah.
gift to ourselves. That's
וזה עניין פרשת והיה אם שמוע תשמעו. And this is the meaning of the next verse, which is if you listen or follow, the mitzvot, Kabbalat all mitzvot, the acceptance of the yoke of the mitzvot. Ainu tikkun kol ha'maasim. So here's his explaining. So what is acceptance of the yoke of the mitzvot? Or you could say the challenge of the mitzvot, to take on this to take on this, you could say, proactive spiritual practice or engagement, right, with the mitzvot. So he's explaining, Hainu tikkun kol ha'maasim l'davkam b'shorsham. This is the reforming of all deeds, so they can attach to their root, meaning their spiritual root. Al yedei Taryag mitzvot, through the 613 mitzvot of the Torah.
You mentioned the Zohar, the Kabbalistic text.
Mhm.
So we live in a particular created world called the world of Asiyah,
That's
the
right.
world of action,
Yep.
because here and only here can human beings, through our behavior in the physical world, actually have influence of a
Right.
spiritual nature within the framework of materiality. It's the fusing of the two, which
Right.
is the biggest miracle of all.
That's right. That's right. Beautiful said. Thank you. זה שאמרו חז"ל, ואספת דגנך דגניך, הנוהג בהם מנהג. In the next verse, it says, and if you listen to all the to all the mitzvot and follow all the mitzvot, then you will harvest your grain in its time, etc. And the sages says, "Haneg bahem minhag," meaning do make this a regular practice. And there's this whole discussion. Rebelli, why don't you explain the discussion between Rashbi, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and Rabbi Ishmael about the two options?
Right.
Without, I think I want to skip the text because it's a little too.
Sure. Sure. Basically,
Yeah,
he's bringing a proof text from the Talmud, which is highlighting what we're discussing here. And there were two. Very briefly, there were two. The Talmud discusses two famous rabbis. One was named Rabbi Shimon. The other was named Rabbi Ishmael. Anyway, Rabbi Shimon, he sat 24/7 in his room with his book. That's what he did.
that's right.
Because he said, hey, there's a verse in the Torah which says that these words should never leave your mouth.
That's right.
Never.
That's right.
So that's what I'm doing. I'm going to
Right.
learn. I'm going to be a spiritual guy all day. I'm going to lock myself in a room and just learn the books and learn the holy wisdom. Okay.
So he was very
His,
practical. He was very literal about that.
very literal.
Yeah.
His friend, Rabbi Yishmael,
Yeah. Ishmael.
said to him, no. And he was a big rabbi too. He was very wise, a very big sage. But he went out and he got a job. He was working for a living.
Yeah.
And Rabbi Shimon said to his friend, how can you do that? How can you do that? He said, well, this week's parsha,
Yeah.
this week's
That's
parsha, we
right.
have it. We're talking about you will gather your crops.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Vasavta deganecha, and go gather your
Right.
crops. How am I supposed to gather my crops if I'm sitting in a room looking at a book all day? It's
Right.
telling me to go work.
Yeah.
So they had an argument, a friendly debate. But here's the punchline. The Talmud says, a lot of people tried like Rebbe Shimon.
That's right.
It didn't work out so well for them.
Yeah.
Many people accepted the viewpoint of Rebbe Shmuel, and it worked out fine.
Right.
They did their job, and then when they came home, they took out their book for an hour and they learned. The point that's being made here is that specifically God put us in a specific set of circumstances whereby he wants us to learn the text. Obviously, we're sitting here learning together what to do, how to do it, what's going on, what are the lessons for our lives. But then you take it and you bring it into the world. Make use of the world, be of use to the world.
So I took from this. It's a very intricate Gemara, so I didn't want to. I think that in itself could be a whole
lesson, sure.
But what I took from it is also, in addition to what you're saying, is that they say Rabbi Ishmael, the way Rabbi Ishmael is justifying working, and here the metaphor for work is, and you shall harvest your grain. That means we need to go out and harvest the grain, right? So somebody's got to do it, right? So without getting into the discussion between them, because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is making a good case against, he says, well, if you're study Torah, other people do it for you. I don't want to get into that, but what Rabbi Ishmael is saying is that it says actually, Hanheg bahem minhag derech eretz, make it a custom of like in daily life, in ordinary life, meaning you should study or you should do the mitzvot just like when you're harvesting your grain. There's a time to sow, and there's a time to water, and there's a time to cultivate, and there's a time to harvest, and all that. It's very there's a routine in it, right? You got to do this by the season. You got to do this in a certain routine. You got to keep it up, right? He says, from that we learn that also with Torah study and also with the mitzvot, you have to make it a routine. So the same kind of routine, the same kind of effort and focus and competency, and effectiveness that you do when you're osef de gancha, you should do with the mitzvot. That's what I got from the.
Yeah, it's a very, very good point. The basic idea is that the beauty and the specialness of the land of Israel is the idea that the physical can be infused through our actions and our interaction.
So basically, it's telling us that we have a mission to influence, to take the blessing that comes into the land of Israel and to spread it out into the world and be a blessing to the nations. And the only way we can do that is through doing the spiritual practice of the mitzvot. And the only way to do that is to do it competently and effectively. And all of that is written as an analogy in these few Pesukim. Actually, the Gemara says, and I think it's in Shabbat, I forget the exact place, Talmud Torah keneged kulam. So in some ways, there's a way to look at the study of Torah as kind of a mitzvah that includes all of the other mitzvot. And this is, I think this is exactly what we're doing. So
it's very cool that we're talking about the land of Israel, and Reb Ruvain is over there soaking up. Usually in August I would be there as part of the birthright, being on the bus with the kids, with the young people. When we get back to regular, and I can get back over to Israel and get that infusion. I need that vaccine too. I need that spiritual vaccine too.
It's called the Holy Suntan.
The Holy Suntan. Ay 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 ay. Bum 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 bum.
YouTube. So if you liked it, please express that with by clicking the like button, and feel free to subscribe to the channel, Hebrew Running Circles YouTube channel. Leave your comments below, and we're going to conclude here. We hope to see you next Wednesday at about 9 o'clock in the morning. Shalom for now. In Sefaria.org, you're going to scroll down the page that says Browse the Library. You're going to look for Chassidut. You click on Chassidut, then you scroll down all the way to the category that says Other Chassidut Works. There it is. And you keep scrolling in that category till you find the Sefat Emet. And Sefat Emet is right there. And then you will scroll down to the book of Deuteronomy. You see that the first book here is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and there's Deuteronomy. You click on Eikev. In Eikev, you click section 12, and we will be reading the third paragraph, which is actually numbered as number 4. Starts with Pasuk Ki haaretz v'chulei.